The courtroom was cloaked in silence that morning, a silence so thick it felt almost sacred. Even the air seemed hesitant to move, as though afraid to disturb what was about to unfold. Outside, the sky wore a heavy gray, clouds gathering like quiet witnesses to the story that would soon be written inside those walls. James sat beside Diep at the front bench. His hand was wrapped gently around hers, his thumb brushing slow, calming circles against her trembling fingers. Between them sat a quiet strength, the kind that is born not from certainty, but from love that has survived every kind of uncertainty. This was the final hearing. The day that would decide the fate of little Nhi, the child they had raised, cherished, and called their own. Across the aisle sat Mrs. Waugh, the child's grandmother. Time had drawn deep lines on her face, lines of love, grief, and stubborn endurance. She sat with her back straight, eyes downcast, her hands clutching a small, faded handkerchief. Her love for her granddaughter was real, yet it came with the ache of loss. She still believed Nhi should stay with her, not out of selfishness, but because blood, to her, was a bond sacred and unbreakable. But love has its own logic. And Diep's heart, though not bound by blood, beat fiercely with the kind of devotion that defied reason. Her gaze moved to the little girl sitting quietly beside the court clerk, her legs dangling above the floor, her wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar room with innocent confusion. The sight pierced through Diep's composure. Memories rose like waves. Nights spent soothing Nhi through fevered tears, mornings when the child clung to her neck whispering, "Don't go, Mommy." A voice broke the silence. "Your Honor," said their lawyer, standing tall yet gentle, "my clients, James and Diep, may not share blood with this child. But since the day she was left alone, they have shared everything else, their home, their hearts, their lives. They've given her more than safety. They've given her love, the kind of love that heals." James stood then, his voice steady though his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Your Honor," he began softly, "I may not be her biological father, but I've carried her in my heart since the first time she called me, Dad. Every laugh, every tear, she is my daughter. And Diep, she's her mother in every way that matters." Diep's tears came then, quiet but unstoppable. "I don't need riches," she whispered to the judge. "I just want her to have a home, one filled with warmth, not walls. With love, not fear." The judge said nothing. Papers shuffled. The air thickened again. Then, from the corner of the courtroom, a small voice trembled through the silence. "Mom." Heads turned. Nhi had stood up, her tiny hand pointing toward Diep. "I want to go home with Mom and Dad." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Even Mrs. Waugh lowered her handkerchief, tears streaming freely. James knelt down, arms open. The little girl ran to him, burying her face in his chest. Diep pressed a hand to her mouth, sobbing as the courtroom collectively witnessed something deeper than law, the pure truth of love, unarguable and divine. The lawyer turned to the judge again. "Sometimes, Your Honor," he said quietly, "it's not blood that defines a family. It's love." For a long moment, the judge did not move. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze. A faint ray of sunlight broke through the gray clouds outside, spilling across the trio, James, Diep, and NHI, as if the heavens themselves had spoken. The next morning brought the final session. The courtroom was once again full, yet the energy had shifted, tense, fragile, but laced with a fragile kind of hope. James and Diep sat close, their hands intertwined. Their faces were pale but resolute. Across from them, Mrs. Waugh approached the stand. Her steps were slow, her shoulders slightly stooped under the quiet burden of age and memory. When she spoke, her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from love. "I only want what's best for my granddaughter," she said softly. "After my daughter passed away, NHI was all I had left. But I'm old now. My health is failing. The roof leaks when it rains." She paused, her eyes clouding with tears. "I was afraid to lose her. She's my daughter's last memory." "But maybe," her voice cracked, and the room leaned in. "Maybe love means letting go, if it makes her happier." The judge's gaze softened. Even Diep's tears came anew, this time not of pain, but empathy. She understood that kind of love, the kind that hurts because it's real. Then the lawyer lifted something in his hand. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "this is what the child drew while we spoke." The judge took the small paper. A drawing of 3 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. A man, a woman, and a little girl between them, all holding hands. At the bottom, in clumsy letters, it read, "Mom, Dad, me, our home." No law book could compete with that. The judge placed the drawing gently on his desk. "Sometimes," he murmured, "the simplest truths come from the smallest hearts." Mrs. Waugh bowed her head, her hand shaking. "If the law allows them to raise her," she whispered, "then I bless them." "Just promise me one thing. Never let her forget her mother." James walked over and knelt before her. "I promise," he said, his voice thick. "We'll tell her about her mother with love, never pain." "She'll know she had 2 women who loved her deeply." The old woman's lips quivered into a smile, her tears falling freely. Something in the air shifted then. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of division, but of reunion. The walls that once felt cold now seemed to breathe with quiet humanity. Compassion had triumphed where conflict had stood. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the solemn weight of truth. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, this court acknowledges that Mr. James and Ms. Diep have provided a stable, loving home for the child known as NHI. Their bond is undeniable, not forged by paper, but by care and devotion. Therefore, this court grants full guardianship and parental rights to Mr. James and Ms. Diep. Silence, then a surge of emotion broke loose. Diep covered her face, sobbing. James bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with the release of months of fear and exhaustion. Across the room, Mrs. Waugh smiled faintly through her tears. "It's okay," she whispered to herself. "She's home." NHI, who had been sitting quietly, blinked in confusion, then saw her parents crying. She ran to them, her small arms wrapping around Diep's waist. "Mommy," she cried, her voice echoing across the courtroom. Diep froze, her body trembling as she embraced the child. "Say it again," she whispered between sobs. "Please, say it again, Mommy," NHI repeated, soft and sure. James knelt beside them, tears streaming down his face. "And me?" he asked gently. The little girl turned, her smile glowing like morning light. "Daddy," she said, one word, one miracle. It broke every wall James had built around his heart. He pulled them both into his arms as the courtroom dissolved into quiet tears. Even the judge's eyes shone with emotion. "It seems," the judge said softly, "that the verdict was already written in her heart." Mrs. Waugh approached then, her steps tender but steady. She laid a trembling hand on Nye's head. "My little girl," she said, "you have a new family now. But remember, your grandmother will always love you too." "I love you, Grandma," the child whispered, clutching Diep's sleeve. Mrs. Waugh smiled, her face glowing with both grief and grace. "Take care of each other," she told James and Diep. "Family isn't given by law. It's chosen by love." "We promise," James said. When they stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight poured through the tall glass doors like a benediction. The case was over. The law had spoken, but love had triumphed. That evening, their small countryside house glowed in the amber of sunset. Jasmine drifted through the open window. Laughter echoed softly against the walls that had once known only silence. James parked the car, turned to Diep and NHI, and whispered, "We're home, home." NHI clapped her hands, eyes sparkling. "Mommy, Daddy, we're home." Inside, the table was set. Deep had cooked Nyi's favorite dish, rice with braised pork and vegetables. The smell of comfort filled the house. Nhi ran around arranging chopsticks in her own chaotic pattern. "Daddy sits here, Mommy sits here, and me in the middle," she declared proudly. James laughed. A deep, unguarded laugh he hadn't known in years. After dinner, the three stepped onto the porch. The night sky stretched above them, vast and full of stars. James wrapped a small blanket around Deep and Nhi. The little girl leaned sleepily against her mother. "Mommy, Daddy," she murmured, "can we always stay together like this?" Deep kissed her forehead. "Always," she said. James looked at them, the woman who had healed him and the child who had taught him to love without fear. Tears filled his eyes once more. "Why are you crying?" Deep whispered. "Because," he said softly, "I finally have everything I ever prayed for." The stars shimmered above, and Nyi's small hand found his. She had already fallen asleep, her breath soft and steady, the sound of peace. James looked up at the sky and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the weight of the past. Only the light of a future that had finally found its way home. Their home, once empty, now overflowed with life. Their hearts, once fractured, now beat in harmony. And under that moonlit sky, James, Deep, and little Nhi, a family not made by blood, but by love, finally found their forever.